So thanks everyone for coming. A man older and wiser than I once said that change is the only constant in life. And I think that he meant that in terms of both actively deciding to change and responding to the various forces around you. But obviously we're here today to talk about that principle as applied to brands. And it's kind of a good day to do it, because I think that most of us tonight will probably watch as one peculiar brand begins the final stages of what might look to the untrained eye like an 18-month slow motion car wreck. But then, as if to further prove that principle, I think that we have no doubt that Donald Trump will still be around to surprise, delight, and possibly horrify us in the future after all the votes are counted. But so we have four people here who all have very good knowledge of managing brands and managing brands through transitional periods. To start, I think that we have a couple people here representing media, which has obviously been going through quite a bit of a change itself. And I'd like to start by bringing up some brands that we think have been through have reinvented themselves successfully. To begin, I would say Vice, because I've been seeing a lot of promos for their HBO show recently, and it's kind of probably showing my age here, but it's been giving me flashbacks to when Vice was a print magazine that you would pick up for free in the record store at St. Mark's Place. And you would kind of read it mostly for these highly opinionated reviews of hardcore punk albums and movies that you were probably never going to see anyway, but then occasionally you might come across like a 4,000-word piece on Canadian biker gangs or the heroin trade in Thailand or something like that. But I'd love for you guys to talk about brands that you think have recently gone through periods of reinvention and come out better on the other side. Whoever you want to start with, who wants to start?
I'm happy to jump in. I'll stick with media.
Great.
We were joking backstage, how long would it be before we started talking about the election? You already broke it, so that was 10 seconds in. I'll kind of stick with that, but I would have to say the New York Times has done a hell of a job of reinventing itself. I worked at Ford Motor Company coming out of some really tough times there when the brand was being dragged through the mud with the rest of the industry post-bailout. Ford's strategy, wisely so, was to differentiate itself as the brand that didn't take the bailout and to disassociate itself with all of the other stories of kind of the wreckage and carnage of the auto industry. And I think that traditional media companies have in many ways gone through that as well when their validity, their future is being postulated, considered by observers everywhere. Is there revenue? Will they continue? Will print continue? And the Times, through this election, has broken story after story, has found really creative ways to do it. Crowdsourcing information to build stories, upshots, digital graphs are amazing. Its Instagram stories have been really strong. Everything is really coming together for really holistic, smart storytelling. And I think that the brand has kind of, put a new face on what's been a very traditional organization. So that's one that I think is really breaking through right now.
Yeah, and then the one that, especially this season, is lumped in a lot with the New York Times for the work they've done is the Washington Post, and they had a much more literal transformation story, right? So they're on the verge of just being another media casualty potentially, and the Times in a way they double down on what they're great at, but then it also explored new areas. Like I'm not ridiculously bullish on the near-term virtual reality and what's going on, but the Times has broken through that, right? Like they've invented a higher standard for that. Washington Post, they figured out how to become a more social brand under this new Jeff Bezos era, which also isn't inherently intuitive. Like it doesn't seem like that would happen. I mean, Amazon, for all its success, has had a hard time playing in this social space, and even when they do things that are socially driven, like Amazon Prime Day, they get a lot of shit for it too, and so they're as far as major marketers go, they're probably one of the worst ones when it comes to social. But then I guess from at least what I can tell as an outsider, Bezos just had the right people running the show there. Is like this isn't an Amazon company, and seeing how well the Washington Post works in the Facebook era. And especially at a time now where it's like, we just get sucked down that Facebook rabbit hole. And I can't tell you how many stories that just without trying every night, I'm like, I have to not just see what's going on the Washington Post because a friend shared it, but what are the next 5 things that people are talking about and sharing there. So, it's like, I can't remember ever going to the site before or before a couple of years ago. It's like, I obviously knew of its reputation, but it was never a thing that was in my orbit or my friend's orbit, especially here.
So from a print media standpoint, again, to your point, I'm not sure that this marks a new era for print, but I do think also, especially with the Post, the Washington Post versus the New York Post, which is always right there with you. The Washington Post is functioning oppositionally. Right, they were barred from campaign events on the Trump side, and they decided, and this I feel like it goes back to some of their DNA, back to the Watergate days. You won't let us in, we're going to find a way in, and they have, as a result, come up with some incredible reporting that has shaped. I see it echoed, again in the Times, and so whereas the Times is sort of going forward with its mission, it's doing VR, it's very big on social media, et cetera, et cetera. The Post is going back to its roots, which I find just kind of very interesting from an investigational journalism perspective. At a time also when newspapers have slashed their entire investigational journalism teams, which has given rise to organizations like ProPublica, which functions as sort of a national investigative journalism organization. So I guess, to a broader perspective, journalism, which comes on Vice, the Post, the Times, journalism is having a bit of a renaissance in this campaign cycle, which I think is very interesting, and I'm sure you see it too, Bruce.
I'm going to mention The Atlantic, another ancient but a magazine that has become relevant by just declaring that it's digital and letting its magazine play its natural role as a slow, thoughtful, kind of snoozy publication, which makes sense when you have a website that's really chasing people down where they live. David talked about how the Facebook feed has become sort of the lifeblood of information, and for a lot of people. And by starting Quartz, which is a very cool site, The Atlantic both reinvented itself, but then also kept to its roots, because it does. I was cruising around this morning to try to get examples, and one of them was coming back to the debate. They had an article on drinking games to play during the debate. So every time that Hillary takes a sip, have a drink. And it was a very funny, clever piece, but it actually was a piece that illuminated their verbal tics, the topics that they are certain to come back to. So it's in their wheelhouse of however many hundreds of years that place has been around, politics and insight. But it's got a whole new brand for millennial, obviously going after the millennial audience. What it tells me, as for Reader's Digest, is you're basically following your audience. You're following your social audience, and you're letting them determine what your communication strategy is, what your headline strategy is, how you're going to connect with a larger audience. And for me, that's what I've learned over the last couple reinventions that I've been a part of, which is when people say, "What's your mission?" My mission is to find an audience, watch it grow, and feed it what it wants, while sticking within this freeway of content that we are good at.
Yeah, media is I feel like we could talk for hours about it, and it's particularly the Washington Post makes me think of another point, which is resistance to change. I know that when the news came down that Bezos was going to buy the Post, there was a lot of skepticism, and not just among journalists on Twitter, but there was a lot of sort of, there are going to be layoffs, there are going to be entire sections cut, then there was sort of the idea that Bezos would tilt the editorial in whatever direction he happened to want, and yet there doesn't really seem to be any evidence of that happening so far. But at the same time, it sort of makes you realize why there is this sort of fear of such what appears to be monumental change. And there's also the risk that I don't know how many people saw the trunk video, but there's kind of a fear that you might go to that place as opposed to where the Washington Post is now. So I wonder if anyone has thoughts on sort of overcoming that initial resistance and going against your better judgment and just kind of moving forward with it when the opportunity comes.
Well, I think to go back to what Bruce was saying, you have to follow your audience. So I think it's understanding your audience and a leadership at the top that understands how important it is to have a sense for the audience. Who's your audience? Is it, if it's your investors, if it's some, small niche group, chances are, you're not going to resonate with the mass market. And so if there is a will to do that at the top, it will eventually, I think, percolate through the organization if you make it clear. And I've seen this, I've been at a couple different companies that have reinvented their brands. They've all been mass market brands. And it's a question really of understanding your consumer. Who is your consumer? Who are you trying to reach? And then conveying internally why it's important to sort of make that the mission of the entire company.
And that also leads to another interesting point that, we, as a nation, we love entrepreneurialism, right? It's in our DNA. You see the success of Hamilton and beyond the genius of Lin-Manuel Miranda, just this story about people who just invented something from nowhere, and so many of the better parts of it, and some of the worst ones too, have stuck with us for more than 200 years. But reinvention isn't necessarily a good thing, and I mean, you see trunk, and it pains me to even say the word on so many levels, just as someone who wants great media institutions to succeed, and also I can't even conjure up the image of that logo without also conjuring the entire John Oliver sketch on this. So it's really tough not to go down that route, but feel free to watch it while I talk. It's great that we have enough of these examples even in one category to speak of, but it's like there are so many bodies on the side of the road for every handful that really make this in a meaningful way.
I just want to jump in terms of a brand that has been completely reinvented, to your point, Alexander Hamilton. Right, here's a guy, arguably not the greatest guy. He had a lot of issues. He was brilliant. They were going to kick him off the $20 bill, and nobody would have said a word. Suddenly, this musical comes out. It is great. If you haven't seen it, it's amazing. It's, I think, reinvented the musical theater genre. But the outcry that they were going to remove this guy from, I think it was the 20. I'm like, the 10 was it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so now they're keeping him, and they're throwing some other white guy off the currency because of a play. So really what Lin-Manuel Miranda has done in terms of reinventing the Hamilton brand is, I think, an incredible brand building story.
Yeah, I mean, obviously brands can be people as well as businesses, and I mean, I feel like what we were just talking about with the media brands kind of gets to, since we're communicators here, gets to this kind of inherent tension between communicating your reinvention to your audience and to the general public versus communicating it internally and sort of making sure that all the pieces are in the right place. And it's sometimes difficult to balance that and to accomplish them both at the same time. And I know my employer was acquired maybe 2 or 3 months ago, and it was kind of something that we touched on but didn't really, we just kind of went with it, and without revealing too much, I wonder if we can sort of talk about how to better square those sort of competing impulses in terms of satisfying these very audiences with very different interests.
Well, I'll start by stating the obvious. It's a gross miscalculation to think that you can do one without the other, without any question. I think that we should also, and it gets harder, of course, the larger the organization, right? The more complex it is, especially for internal communications. We have to also consider the generation of the workforce as well, that there are people that aren't going to be willing to deal with what they perceive to be, kind of hiding behind the curtain from the executive office, not being transparent. There are people who are looking for careers with businesses that mean something to them, that touch them emotionally. That's the workforce that we have coming in today. And so I think that with improper communication internally of this kind of change, you're risking a lot of future talent by not being really clear and really forthcoming with what's coming down the pike.
So I had a very deep professional experience with this, literally across the street from here, where MRY is based. And so, since I'm no longer there, I can tell you anything I want. No, I mean it's a positive story, but so when I was running marketing for the agency, first of all, one of the things I had to do very clearly, I realized when I needed to articulate what I was doing was I plotted all the activities that was going on a grid of client or staff retention or acquisition. And it was a little unusual, especially talking to people in HR, let alone the CEO, and saying, I'm your outward-facing marketing person, but I really care about employee retention. And I think a lot of the people in this room are also in this kind of services business, or whether for yourself or for your clients, working with B2B brands like I was for the agency itself, which was my day-to-day client, or working with brands that don't have a Jeff Bezos to back them in any way. And so there was a lot of internal debate on how much we needed to say what we are. Because on one hand, for a services business, really there were only two things that mattered externally. It was what's the work we've done lately, and who do we have there? And Patrick knows this very well, because anytime there's like a little whisper inside the agency, someone would share that with Patrick, and it would be about the work we're doing with our clients and clients themselves, or someone coming or going. It was never like, oh, we've got a new tagline, let's leak this to Agency Spy. I wish that was the worst of my problems, but to counter a lot of that, I said the reason we need to be very clear about who and what we are is for everyone who works there, and especially the younger folks who are on the agency side. If you're in your early mid-20s, you're definitely not doing it for the paycheck. You're not doing it for the hours, quality of life, like none of this, and especially this generation of people who want to care about what they're doing, just to know why they're there. I mean, how many people can even name whatever Coke's current tagline is? Probably not. No, I have no idea. I've worked on Coke for ages. But this bit of being able to galvanize your internal team is so important, just to give people something to rally around, even if no one even comes to your website and sees that beautiful little line you put on there.
I was just going to mention that for in legacy brands, it's incredibly important who your first few hires are, because they send just an amazing message to the people who are there and are wondering, like, what's the direction, and is there momentum here, and is this reinvention, does it make sense, is it realistic? And so when you make those first two hires and they are great hires, and they are people who are kind of are super digital and quite visionary in a legacy brand, like those statements alone can create momentum, and raise the bar for sort of everyone there. One other thing to mention is that in today's media world, I think everyone here knows it, but you kind of have to state it. It's a treacherous world. Like, it's not easy to make money if you're not Google or Facebook. The agency world, I don't know it well, but it's not easy to make money. And who's on top, who the CEO is absolutely, can be incredibly critical. Like, it seems so obvious to say it, but when you have a CEO who is willing to both be transparent, but then also be decisive about what a company needs to do to not only survive and thrive, it changes everything within an organization. So I got hired at Reader's Digest by our CEO, Bonnie Kinzer, who I think is just an amazing CEO in that she has like a legacy background, but she's also quite visionary, and she kind of brings it together. And in the 8 months that I've been there, I've just seen like, wow, anything is possible when you have the right leadership.
Yeah, I mean, I was reading the press release about your hire last night, and it very much sort of cast you as a change agent in a way, sort of reviving. I think revive is a good word for what was definitely a legacy brand, and it made me wonder, how then do you approach this new role, and how does it, do you get your mind in the place where it needs to be as opposed to previous positions that you've had? So I know that the language mentioned, digital and growth and a lot of that, but I felt like it was the specifics were I wanted to know more.
So I was I'm a print editor, very old school. 30 plus years in the industry editing magazines. I was the editor of San Francisco Magazine for 11 years. We hardly even had a website. But I got a job at ESPN, and that really changed my career because ESPN is truly a cross-platform. Yes, they make all their money off of cable, and that's going away pretty fast, so they're in their own kind of difficult straits. But it had always been a really strong digital company, very strong video with a print element, and global, and willing to take risks. And so you get in that culture, and you see like the world kind of opens up. And so that's what I've used in that I kind of see print in its place, that I'm good at it, but that basically my job is to hire people who know the other stuff and who are digital natives who can be super creative. But I got hired with that attitude by somebody who saw that that's what was needed. So that it doesn't start with me. It started with whoever hires me.
The facilitator of the change.
Patrick, I thought
she's my boss. She tells me what to do. I do it.
I thought you made an interesting point about the press release, and this is by no means a slight to your brand, Bruce, because we've all done it. But I think there's a real danger in writing or speaking in ambiguities about where we're going as people become more and more savvy about what these words actually mean. I'm a PR guy by trade. I've written a lot of buzzwords into press releases and things like that at a time had its place. You could get away with that. I don't think you can anymore, especially when it comes to things like digital, right? That there's actual meaning behind that. Yep. There are people who know what that means, and that affects your brand when you're out there looking silly by saying we're going digital and we're going to have platform growth, and speaking in broad sweeping terms that really are euphemisms for nothing. That we have to be more careful about external communication in terms of what we're actually doing.
Right. And I think that there's, especially with the media companies, there's this implication that part of this reinvention is sort of a changing of the core product. That at least I know the New York Times is producing much more video than they used to, and they have more interactive sections, and there's more, they did the Upshot to sort of replace 538. But at the same time, I think that there are other brands that have been through reinventions without really touching the core product. I know that when we were on the phone before this sort of preparing, and we mentioned Domino's Pizza, which is kind of like, my opinion here, but it's fairly mediocre standard delivery cheese and bread. But recently, if you look at Domino's, it's kind of like there've been all kinds of headlines about how Domino's is a tech company now, which on the face of it kind of makes no sense because there's no real tech product, there's no real digital product here. Again, it's just bread and cheese. But you look at all these little things that they've done, like ordering pizza via emoji, or I don't know that they deliver by drones yet, but they probably will. And there was something about want to call it a driverless car or an automated car or something. But
self-heater in it.
Yeah. But the point being that there's different ways to reinvent, not all of which involve changing the thing that you actually sell or provide. And I'd love to have some more examples from you guys in terms of companies that maybe have changed their communications without altering the service that they offer.
Yeah, well, one of my favorite, and I love Domino's. They're actually one of the only brands with that and maybe one of the very few I've seen that has a whole page just for where all their different bots live, right? I mean, it's amazing. So they've got chat bots on like practically any platform you can think of, and it's this just amazing communication strategy even before there's an audience, which is kind of different from what we were talking about before. And so, it's like sometimes follow the audience, sometimes you just take a chance and trying to get there before the audience does. So you're the first one they see, and you have that opportunity to interact with them, and it kind of goes into a bit of that portfolio management approach for it. One that I'll bring up as one that I love, and not just because I got to stop by GE's office yesterday, but GE, right? Like this is a phenomenal brand reinvention. I give a lot of credit to Sam Olstein, who's their innovation person. If you're on Twitter, tell him I gave him a big shout out. Easy enough to find. So Sam is just like, like he seems like just a normal person, and yet the kind of things that he is able to pull off there, and with his wider team, they're going into volcanoes, and you have to look up the GE volcano story, and using all these sensors to then track this thing, and like the number of technologies that they're using and bring together the best of what they're doing for some kind of global good is crazy. They had Drone Week. They're playing with things like emoji science, right? And so trying new ways to communicate. And one of the challenges in a case like this is someone who is watching Bill Nye talk about science in emoji form is most likely not the one who's buying some jet engine from them, or some MRY machine, or one of the products that keep their company afloat. But then again, back to Dan's really important point, to attract talent, and to attract talent today is so important, right? Because they're going to be competing with Facebook. I mean, everyone's competing with each other, and you want the best minds out there coming to you. Then you need to go where they are. And the media too. The media is so fickle these days, and so to be able to grab attention, do some of these bold things, and stay relevant, keep that top of mind. I don't know I don't know if Sam knows exactly what he's doing for their share price, but things like that become so vital to invest in, and it's without changing the product that they're built. It's just tapping into that very old story that they are a company that has helped build and employ America, for so many generations.
And it's interesting from to your point and something else that Dan said, to do it on the surface, sort of, and to not actually reach the audience. You're not really sure who GE's audience is for this stuff, and they're doing great things. But again, who are they trying to reach? And to their customer base, does the customer base look at them and say, do they even take that into consideration? I don't know. So in that case, who are they trying to reach with the reinvention story? Domino's. I have friends who buy Domino's pizza because they like watching the little pizza tracker and knowing it's going to be at their door. Again, to refer to themselves as a tech company seems a bit like a reach. So, and it also plays into the point that you guys were making before about transparency and being genuine. People see through this stuff, and the buzzwords, and we have, we're doing this, look, friend me on Facebook, we're doing a filter, we're doing this, we're doing that. How much has it really penetrated the whole company, and do the employees know why you're doing it? That I think is, it's sort of image versus transformation, which is an interesting decision. Maybe for a GE, there's not going to be a lot of transformation within the core products and the core business. And on 30 Rock, it was the microwave division, right? And maybe there won't be a lot of transformation in the microwave division. But at the same time, maybe people will feel, either they'll feel a little better about the microwave they're buying, or it won't have any impact, but for the external world and the news media, et cetera, they can say, well, GE is making the transition into the 21st century. So I guess don't do it just to do it, but have a clearer view of who you're trying to reach and exactly why, and it can't seem too much of a stretch, I think.
I feel like there are a lot of people out in Irvine, California, working at Taco Bell who are living the brand that they they say that they are in all the things that they're doing today. I mean, really, like, they put out all kinds of cool stuff through content, all going back to very silly things that, but those are real products. They introduce a new product every day, but it's still, at the end of the day, like, probably questionable beef and cheese and shell,
But now you can get it for breakfast.
Right, exactly. But I think that they've been, clever with their content and with the way that they use platforms that is authentic to who they are. And I think they know exactly who their audience is. So that might be one that I would throw out.
Mm-hmm. I think this kind of gets to the larger issue of execution too. Is it's like change doesn't happen in a vacuum, and it's not something that you can just kind of flick a switch and it's on. You can't just, and especially when you're a public-facing company, you can't just run an ad campaign saying, we're different now, or put out a press release, or stage an event necessarily. It has to be sort of a multi-part machine. And like, one example for me is, I'm not going to call anyone out, but I've gotten some pitches from PR firms who say, I cover, for context, I cover the creative advertising industry, which is a relatively specific beat, but I've gotten some pitches from PR firms that say, you should cover us because we're a marketing agency now. And I'm a little skeptical of that, because it kind of just looks like you write something that doesn't necessarily mean that a change has occurred. So what I'm getting at is, how does this process begin, and how does it become more than just a message existing sort of in space, as it were?
Well, to that point, I'll go to iHeartMedia's sort of becoming iHeartMedia, which at the end of the day is how we don't refer to it as a rebranding. We have become iHeartMedia. When I started the company 5.5 or so years ago, it was Clear Channel Radio. And we had about 850 radio stations in 150 markets, and a nascent streaming platform called iHeartRadio. My boss came in. He is known for sort of a consumer brand building and transformations along that line. How do you make your product relevant to your audience? And then how do you get the message out? I mean, radio is still the medium with the biggest reach in America. And that message was, of course, getting lost because people love shiny new things, and you can't really blame them. But 21st century, you have to make your product not just relevant, but to get the message out on who you are. So within, I would say, a year and a half, we had become Clear Channel Media and Entertainment instead of Clear Channel Radio. Now, that was basically a rebrand because we were moving to popularize iHeartRadio. And we launched to launch iHeartRadio, we launched the iHeartRadio Music Festival, which is 2 days of music in Las Vegas. A couple of years after that, it became very clear that while iHeartRadio was the brand that we were known for and the brand that people were looking to us for in terms of innovation, technology, reaching consumers, advertisers, another key audience, would look at Clear Channel and not understand that Clear Channel and iHeartRadio were the same company, under the same leadership, with the same goals. So in very quick succession, the decision was made that we would become iHeartMedia, putting the name of essentially our best-known product on the entire company while also sending the message that we were a forward-looking, digital-facing company able to reach the most consumers in America on any platform that the consumer wanted to use. Digital, radio, mobile, social, and we have built our presence on each one of those platforms over the last couple of years. Now, many people don't remember when we were Clear Channel. Internally, it was communicated down to the employees. We have, as a company, become iHeartMedia. This is not a renaming, it's not slapping a new sticker over the old brand. We have become this company, and you should all be proud of what you helped build. And I think that has resonated extremely well throughout the company. And iHeartRadio continues to grow, iHeartMedia continues to play across all platforms. And again, the Clear Channel brand still applies to outdoor because that's how its clients knew it. We also have a billboard company, Clear Channel Outdoor. Its clients, advertisers, know it as Clear Channel Outdoor. Our clients, our consumers, our listeners did not know Clear Channel. They knew iHeartRadio, and that's who we are now.
I work at Reebok, and we have an ambition to be the #1 fitness brand in the world. Now, you look back just a few years, and we were on the logo of every NFL jersey that was out there. So that's a pretty bold stance to willfully walk away from professional sport, which we did. Which is not a superficial move by any means. That means cutting deals. That means a willingness to lose relationships with retailers. That means a willingness to change your entire creative model in terms of the way we position ourselves. That means recreating the company from the inside out. So definitely in the midst of major seismic organizational and fundamental change at Reebok right now. And the question was, how do you do this from the inside? And certainly for us, it was leadership and commitment. But we also rallied around a really powerful brand mantra that we still live of be more human. We feel that it's incumbent on each of us to go out there and push ourselves to the limits of our physicality and mentally and socially. And everything that we do comes back to that main point. Now, that could be a tagline. It was a Super Bowl ad. But it's something that permeates everything that we do, from product design to the way that we position ourselves and the way we talk to our consumers on social, to the way that we show up at POS, all the way through the organization. And I can tell you that anyone who stops by Canton, Massachusetts and feels the need to come inside Reebok, which you would enjoy, that people are living this brand inside and out more than I've ever seen as an agency guy for a very long time. And so that's something that we were able to, I think, capture existing love for fitness within people, but then to really bring that out of them, and to build organizationally through new hires and good human resources a team that lives that, so that everything that we do is built on this premise of fitness. And it's a very bold move. There have been repercussions of this in terms of losses, and like I said, in terms of retailer relationships that are hard. Some people might not know where to go find the latest Reebok shoe right now. These are hard challenges that we had to take on in the process of reinvention. But these are necessary steps for us to be what we have the aspirations to be.
I wonder, when you make the decision to reinvent yourself, how specific does the goal need to be? I mean, do you need to have this very carefully plotted multimedia plan for the status of our company in the future? Or is it more sort of a moving from point A and toward wherever point B happens to be? I mean, that seems a little disorganized, but at the same time, it's kind of like a lot of companies seem to be more sort of driven by external forces. And it makes me think, is it necessary to plot your destination as specifically as possible, or does that sometimes interfere with your trajectory?
I can speak to, again, media. Because the market is changing so fast, and the way in people's, just even 3 years ago, people weren't getting content on their phone. Now, 60, 70% of your content you get on your phone. Like it's moving so fast that it's kind of a waste of time to try to have a specific plan that goes beyond a year, in my opinion. But at the same time, you can state what your vision is, and then have a detailed plan for that year, based on what you know at this time. Reader's Digest, we've gone through like a couple of reinventions. The first one is that Reader's Digest used to be the name of the company, and the company includes Reader's Digest, the magazine, but also 7 other brands, including Taste of Home and Family Handyman, some really cool niche content brands that have the same DNA, which is user-generated content, curated content, and very authentic, very heartland. And so the first reinvention was is similar to Wendy's, which is becoming the name that it should have been, which is Trusted Media Brands. That's the name of the company now, and Reader's Digest is just one of its properties. And that makes it just a ton of sense, because it's taking what's common to their DNA, which is the audience's trust in the content, and turning that into the name. So that's number one. Then number two, Reader's Digest has a very strong magazine and isn't going to change the magazine. It's a very successful magazine. It's found its audience, but it needs to bloom as a digital property. And in that case, you're basically just throwing tons and tons of content out, and your strategy is how much content to test, in what topics, and then follow the response. So it becomes this like test, assess, test, assess, and keep growing. And it's fascinating because then it becomes like a month-by-month planning session. And where the market is just appearing before you based on what cool content you're putting up that is a part of your DNA. And so, I mean, in the almost year that I've been there, that's led to like 100% growth in our millennial audience. And that's all been organic. That's not like anybody declared, oh, we are now a millennial digital enterprise. We put out the content, a millennial audience connected with it. And so that's why I'm saying that year-long thing, but really a month-by-month follow the market.
I think when you make the decision to change your company, it also depends on your internal company culture. And at iHeartMedia, it was a radio company for a very long time, with all that implies in terms of a bureaucracy that might have built up, et cetera, et cetera. The leadership now, we have a number of company values, one of which is a bias to quick decision making. Right? We make decisions not when we have all of the information, but when we have enough of the information. We have a 24-hour rule. Things that get thrown out there, you must respond within 24 hours, or sorry, we cannot take that into consideration at this point if we're going to keep the company moving forward. At our company, you will not, as hard as this may seem to believe, you will not be punished for making mistakes. If you do not make mistakes, it means you're not trying anything new. And so anything you are leading or managing is essentially, it won't move. It will never move. The assets that you're given to manage will wither under your stewardship because you are not willing to try anything that may conceivably fail. In most companies, one person, if you're sitting around a conference table, one person can kill an idea. Whereas to get it through the process, say there's 11 people, one person can kill an idea and all 11 have to agree. That is not necessarily a formula for transformation, for evolution, for moving your company ahead. So once you have a set of those values at the leadership level and you're able to make the rest of the company understand this is how we are now doing business, I think it will enable you to position yourself better for growth in the 21st century.
Then, what happens when internally you're all on board, you all agree on your mission and how you define your brand, but maybe that doesn't quite square with public perception. Like, I take Facebook, for example. All their messaging is pretty clear. We are a platform. We are neutral. We are here to help people connect and share things with one another. And then there was a story that popped up this year that, maybe Facebook had a certain political bias, a certain, statistical maybe political bias in the stories that people see, because ultimately they were making decisions in terms of what content got showed to which people. And then there was a debate, certainly among people in media, as to, is Facebook actually a media company? And the consensus, at least among some, was that they are, but they don't want to be, or they don't want to admit that they are. And now I think that Facebook is in kind of an odd place because I know they fired the people who actually curated the feed, and then immediately after that, more headlines came up about fake stories trending in people's timelines. So I think it's kind of like a case for Facebook that they're like, maybe we need to transform a bit more than we think we do internally.
I think it's what is a media company? After all, I mean, there's sort of a label there. But from a Facebook perspective, I think they started out as a company, as a technology company, without a consumer bias. They were not leaning toward communicating with the consumer. It's like Google, it's like Apple. A lot of companies in Silicon Valley talk to themselves, talk to each other, talk to their sort of limited pool of cutting-edge, tech-savvy people. So Facebook has grown to the point where it needs to be a mass-market platform and a mass-market product. And I think they're still sort of feeling their way. And they are very quick to apologize and backtrack and try and take a new angle of doing things, which I respect as sort of an onlooker. Sometimes I still think they could be a little more transparent. What they do with your data and how hard it is to opt out of getting things. And you can't opt out of everything because your data is extremely valuable and makes them what they are. So you sort of do your best. Last night I noticed on my Facebook mobile, there's a new little icon down there. If you want to buy some stuff, they are now enabling that e-commerce functionality. it wasn't really compelling, but it's the first iteration, and I think they're very quick to refine as they go. So again, they are trying to be everything to everybody, and I think they may not want to admit it, but that's where they're heading.
Yeah, and I mean it's funny with Facebook too, because it's very clear what the values are of Mark Zuckerberg and his esteemed wife and the leadership team there, and just as an overall mission, right? Connecting everyone around the world and treating anyone in America as equal as someone in Saudi Arabia or a Basque separatist or whoever wants to get on their platform, right? So that all can have their space there. They want to make communications more accessible. They want to make voting more accessible at a time when people are literally tweeting that women should not have the right to vote, which is just a whole level of absurdity. So for people who want to really just live and breathe isolationism, or intolerance, there are some things that just don't fly there. I mean, it's like just send them to Twitter. Really, so there are some things where it's like, if you really don't like what they stand for, then just use something else. But beyond that, the whole nature of media companies is it's a really tricky thing, and especially as someone who's spent a long time on the agency side. So so Dan brings up having more and more focus, right? But agencies' relationships with media companies is really tough right now, because while coming from Publicis agency, iHeartMedia has a phenomenal relationship with Publicis and my parent agencies through there. Most of the time, we don't know who's a partner and who's a threat. All of these media companies now have creative services that they're offering, content studios, things like that, so that brands can just go to them directly and cut agencies out of the picture. Now, and some of this, it's tough to see, and it's tough for me to remove bias from the equation here, but what is being done is kind of like a long-term vision versus just opportunism, right? The media world is a very tough place to turn a profit, so anything that they can do to add more services and is really may just help their bottom line. On the other hand, there's a lot of devaluing of creative now, because you have a lot of media companies that just give in creative services for free when if it means spending more media with them. So when you go back to the point of companies pitching you and saying we're a creative agency now, it's like you get those pitches from the New York Times, you could get them from Facebook, and yes, there are PR firms and all other that creative and media shops I've been to are competing with, and it is by far the messiest time I've experienced on the agencies. Like even now versus 5 years ago, there is no comparison how much more of a difficult business it is, especially in some of the core things that we talk about today, like communications and determining who you are, and then standing out amongst clients who increasingly, those on the brand side, also are more empowered to take things in-house. The technology's gotten there. They're attracting a lot of that talent that might have gone over to more the creative side. So it is extremely messy. So it's like someone could show up with 50 different offerings on the back of their business card, and you know what? I'd buy it for the most part.
Yeah, well, that makes a good point, that when you reinvent your brand, you kind of bring all your partners along with you, whether they are necessarily in on it or not. And there was a story that broke last night that Snapchat is going to change the way that they partner with media companies, and instead of sharing the ad revenue, they're just going to pay them up front, and then just kind of. So ultimately, the argument would be that why then would it matter as to the quality of the material that we provide to you, as long as if the success is not the determining factor in how much we get paid. Then the point being that if you are making a decision to reinvent yourself, you have to kind of make overtures, make moves to bring all your closest partners along. And that presents obviously its own set of challenges, which is going to be different across different industries. But I wonder if anyone had experiences dealing with partner organizations in that respect. I mean, it was Reebok or MRY or someone that they worked with closely that had to be sort of brought along on the reinvention process.
I mean, certainly, again, for Reebok, we had very deep relationships with large retailers. That is an ongoing conversation. It's a sort of a reacquainting process with a lot of these brands of who we are and what we intend to be now and what that mission means for their consumers coming into the store. Because the proposition of a shoe that Shaquille O'Neal wears on the floor and will help you dunk is a lot different than the shoe that you're going to wear as a normal human being going into a CrossFit box. It's very different. So there's a sales force that needs to be educated on that. There are people that need to be messaged properly on that. So certainly that's a challenge and one that shouldn't be taken lightly. But yeah, I think that it's also important in the reinvention process to find those partners that that kind of fit along with the new you, that fit the sort of the intended purpose of what you hope to be. They can help validate that for you. Just like Bruce said, those first two hires are so critical internally for perception. What are we going to be? Look at these two people. Geez, they're savvy. They're so smart. Look at their resume. Look what they've done before. I think it's the same externally for the partners that you choose to bring on board with your brand. That if this is the new face that you're putting on, those who are alongside you will say just as much about you as what you're going to write into your press release or put on your website.
Yeah, I agree. From our perspective, what iHeartMedia and iHeartRadio are able to do is to give partners more platforms and opportunities to reach consumers. So you have live events. We've got, as a company, 20,000 live events across America. But the tentpole events, iHeartRadio Fiesta Latina, which is coming up at the beginning of next month, the 80s show, which is a new one that's coming in February, the music festival, the pool party. So for pool party, an advertiser like, say, Bacardi would be a natural, right? So as we build our range of assets, we're able to offer our partners a variety of new ways to reach their different and evolving audiences, which I think has been a benefit to them, especially if they, look, you can reach hundreds of millions of people every month through broadcast radio, but you can also activate them on site at events. They can be part of our Twitter feed. You can have Snapchat stories. We do all of this stuff on, throughout digital, mobile, social, every platform. So I think it's, as you build your new company and you want to bring your advertisers and partners along with you, give them something to react to and say, this, you have to understand them as well. So this is perfect for you. This is exactly in line with your mission of reaching the audience that you are trying to get now as you try and build and extend your own brand. So we are not just your platform, we are your partner. And we're here not just to get the money from you, but to build your brand and your product while we work together.
And speaking of this, in terms of your own brand and who it is you're working with, I had some experience with this over the past a few months leaving MRY, and so which required a series of reinventions after another. And for those here in the consulting space, maybe had similar experiences, but I've always had a big brand to associate with, and at 360i and iCrossing and most recently MRY, and then I wound up, there was a lot of change over there. The founder left, so wound up going out on my own. Serial Marketer as a brand did not exist 6 months ago. And I had this Marketer Studio blog, which was a name that in 2004 or 5, I thought like, Inside the Actor Studio, I'll play with that. But then I realized I was going to speak at an event in May, and I didn't have a company name to associate myself with, and I didn't just want to be David Berkowitz, and so I had a whole list of names out there, and then I remembered that Aaron Stroud over at W2O Group wrote a blog post where he mentioned me at one point as serial marketer, not killer, and so for New Yorkers here especially, you might appreciate the reference. And I was like, and you talk about brand identity too. I'm like, well, I want to be someone in this phase, especially now going through a lot of change, that can actually laugh at my own brand, right? And something that I'll at least get a kick out of. And a friend of mine just wrote me 2 days ago and said, I finally got it. And he knew about this the day it launched. But all this too, even the kinds of initial clients that I was looking to work with. And it was a really tough mix of who you work with opportunistically and who you work with because you just want to do something together. And there are a couple of these companies I'm working with now that I'm definitely, like, they're definitely not paying the rent, but I love the space they're in. I love what they stand for. I want to be associated with them. And it is tough trying to figure out that portfolio approach because I feel like all the brands I'd most want to work with are those that basically can't pay me anything. Always a challenge paying New York rent. And the other piece of it is like now all of a sudden there were people that I needed to know to be able to refer things to redesign the site, always in like who's going to come with you on that journey. And so it's just been a tremendous experience, but not one that's like this uniform. Like when people ask me how's it going, I don't want to just paint this rosy picture. It's tough as all hell. I have to work harder for myself than I did when I had an employer paying the bills. Not that I didn't work hard, but it is one of the it's by far the hardest thing professionally I've had to do in terms of a reinvention.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be a lot of work involved on any scale reinvention, but I mean, if we can close the circle here, at what point do you know that a process of reinvention has been successful? I mean, there's no real end, but at the same time, there's a goal. And how do we determine when we've reached that goal, when the pizza has been delivered successfully, so to speak? What do we turn to have an accurate assessment of this reinvention process?
Just from my gut, it's a good question, by the way. From my gut, it's when you go to work and you're not thinking about reinvention. You're just doing what you're doing, and that everyone on your team is doing what they're doing, and that the audience is just responding the way the audience is responding. So it's no longer a conscious effort.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. Not a lot to add when you realize that both your employees and your external audiences just assume you are who you say you are. There's no reason to question it. There's no reason to say, didn't you used to be, or weren't you once? And I would say, for me personally, to see my company referred to as some reporters still do, as Clear Channel, it takes me a second because we have so fully integrated iHeartMedia as our internal and external identity.
Couldn't have said any better.
So it's not so much we've arrived at our destination. It's more sort of a retrospective, indeed, we did at some point.
I would put it the other way. It's now we start. We are a new thing. And in Reader's Digest, what it means is that we are producing 10 to 15 times more digital content than when we started. And that's going to be our future. And that content is going to connect with millennials because it's got Reader's Digest values, but it's about their lives. And you just don't think about it. You just are doing it, and you're chasing that new business, that new dream.
Yeah, because brand building never stops.
I don't think anyone in here knows an executive who's going to say that we reached our destination. I don't think that's a thing.
But to the points made here, when I can finally take the previous CMO of MRY off my title there, then I'll feel like that reinvention's done.
Well, a lot of it probably depends on whether your investors agree, right? Wherever you happen to be.
That's a sobering way to end it.
Were we going to take questions, or were we going to? Okay, or we could have some suggestions for brands that we think need to reinvent themselves. I have so many thoughts about Twitter.
Yeah, hey, a lot was said today about executive leadership and how important that is. I'm a millennial peon who has no control over that. And what's the approach? Surely you haven't all been holding hands with your CEOs and skipping through fields of flowers all the time. What do you do when there's so many? Okay, so not Wendy, but for everybody else, what do you do? I know probably a lot of people are here with old, stubborn brands. I represent a nonprofit that is had the same executive leadership for almost all of its 40 years of existence. There's a lot of fear about change. What do you do when there's not that willingness on the executive level? What can you do?
So a couple things from my perspective. That's a good question. You do have power because you can choose to be somewhere or you can choose not to be somewhere. So your existence is a powerful thing because they need you. Two, I think that it's oftentimes taken for granted for younger people coming into the workforce that you have a point of view that most people at a table do not have and cannot access. And so not speaking up in meetings, not contributing, it may help reduce your anxiety. It may help you be less scared in a meeting, but it doesn't help the company because without them hearing from your point of view, they're never going to grow, and change has to happen. There's no brand that can't change. And so whether or not it's comfortable internally or not, they have to hear those opinions of people coming into the workforce who understand parts of the business that they cannot, that have cultural perspectives especially, that they cannot access. Without that, they're in an echo chamber of themselves, and the brand is not going to be able to be successful.
Yeah, and some of it's also like there are definitely executive leaders who I've worked with who are incredibly defensive, don't want to hear about anything, and so there's kind of two options in a sense. One is try to find some of those other champions. There might be someone who's a title or two above, who maybe even a different department, right? Who's just also itching to take things on a little bit more and just say yes to some things that maybe they can get away with that someone else can't. And sometimes like it just like I've been in places, and especially I was at a place when I was around 25, and I was so uncomfortable with a lot of the management decisions. I had to get the hell out of there, and it sucks and it's tough, but it doesn't always work, unfortunately.
A quick question. You started the panel talking about media companies that have kind of rebranded themselves. Last week, Esquire resurrected Spy the last 30 days of the election. As a Gen Xer New Yorker, that resonated with me, but I was kind of curious, like, why does it have resonation to millennials? And I thought it was kind of a curious 30-day case study from Esquire.
Yeah, I don't know if it does, to be totally honest. I think that, part of it was to get on they were the first ones to call out Donald Trump as a short-fingered vulgarian. And I think that resonated now, and I haven't seen anything really, and I loved Spy magazine, but I haven't seen anything coming out of that, relaunch, such as it is, that would lead me to say, Spy is back. I think it was, again, one of those things that almost like a buzzword, you say it just to say it and see how it plays, and then it fades away.
More about playing on the nostalgia of a certain small portion of the audience.
Several of you talked about Facebook rebranding itself. I don't know if you've seen this on the news. They're going to food delivery service. So my question is this. I mean, you talked about, becoming iHeartMedia. Could Facebook, because of its decisions, actually lose their brand as a community, as a networking company, and in spite of itself, within its brands becomes a retail company like Amazon, for instance? Is that possible that brands accidentally reinvent themselves?
Well, to something that David said, Twitter, what does its brand stand for now? And I think that some of what it does stand for has been incredibly detrimental in terms of its long-term goals, which, as recently as last week, were selling itself. Facebook, I don't know that it wants to be what people want it to be, basically. So I think if something like food delivery starts resonating, great, but I think everybody now is like trying to deliver food. So if it doesn't, you know what, they'll kill it quietly. But they have the ability and they have the track record for that kind of flexibility.
Thank you, everyone.